What's up, friends? Isn't it crazy how different things look when you get up really close to it? You know, maybe like when you get it under a microscope and you take a closer look, suddenly the whole picture looks different. And not only that, you also might learn something you didn't know before. So you might be thinking, Montana, what's this science lesson? Well, today we're kicking off a series about a subject that I think you're going to love. I mean, this is a topic that I think every student wants to talk about. It's something you just can't get enough of. Yeah, that's right. You guessed it. I am talking about science. Okay, maybe science isn't exactly the thing you're dying to discuss here at church. I'm sure some of you love science class, but some of you might not really love it, and maybe you absolutely hate it. Regardless, you're probably thinking, why are we talking about science at church? Well, this series is called Under the Microscope, and it's going to help us take a closer look at science and faith, and how the two work together. Because isn't that exactly what putting something under the microscope does? It lets us take a closer look at how it's made, how it works, and what's really happening behind the surface. Our hope is that by putting science and faith under the microscope together, we'll learn a little more about both. Now, let me just stop here and say that I know you might be thinking that when you put science and faith under the microscope, they seem like they shouldn't go together. For a lot of people, science and faith seem like complete and total opposites. Neither one is bad, of course, but they just seem like they should be in separate categories. Just think about the way people have talked about faith and science in the last couple of years. Anytime the two topics come and they're in the same conversation, they're typically competing against each other. It's almost like if you're for one, you have to be against the other. From the way people talk about it, it seems like they just can't possibly work together. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, take these two ingredients. There's baking soda, which is really just like an odorless, I've actually never smelt it, white powder, right? Like nothing crazy about it. Then we have something really different. So we got some vinegar. It smells really bad. And so at first glance, you're like looking at these and they're totally different, you guys. But then, let me just show you. When you add it together, we got some baking soda here. Fun. Then some white vinegar. Look at that reaction. That's awesome, you guys. Super cool. And now, you guys, we wouldn't know that unless we didn't mix it together. And I didn't really realize it did this, so I bet you didn't either. I'd like to think that science and faith work the same way. At first glance, the two seem like they have very little in common. They seem like two separate topics that could even work against each other at times. But when you put them under the microscope and take a closer look, I think you'll realize the two have more in common than you might think. Now, maybe you're thinking, who cares? Well, while this separation of science and faith may not matter much to you now, there will come a point in your life when you'll have to think about it. Part of having a faith on your own means deciding what you believe about certain things. And honestly, that part of faith can be scary. Because what if something you learn in science class doesn't line up with what you've read in the Bible? Or what if believing what you know to be true about science makes you question what you thought was true about God? When the world seems to be telling you to choose a side, how do you know which one to choose? What if you want to be team science and team faith? Well, here's the good news. I don't think we have to be afraid of those questions. In fact, I think questions about learning about science can actually be a really good thing for your faith. And to prove it, I want to go back in time. Because back in the day, some of the world's best scientists were Christians. They believe in the Bible and the God who inspired it. Okay, in the 1400s, there was a guy named Copernicus who studied the planets and the stars. He actually discovered that the Earth revolves around the sun, and he was also Christian. In the 1500s, this guy, Galileo, made a lot of cool discoveries about science. He knew so much that people started calling him the father of science. And guess what? The father of science was also a Christian. Later on, there was a guy named Isaac Newton. He's considered to be one of the greatest scientists ever, but he also spent a lot of time writing and learning about God. Yep, he was a Christian too. And by the 1900s, this guy, William Kelvin, was teaching people a lot about heat and temperature. In fact, scientists still measure temperature by using what's called the Kelvin scale. And as I'm sure you've guessed by now, Kelvin was a Christian too. You know, there's so many more names that I could have said, but those are all names you've probably heard before at school or in your textbooks. But there are so many more Christians working in science and making incredible advancements in their field today. These are people who have jumped into studying the way things work as a way to understand more about the God who created them. People who want to make advancements in science in order to follow God's call to help those around them. They're people who believe that learning about science may be a way to learn more about God. Remember the science experiment we did a few minutes ago? We saw that two different ingredients came together to create a cool chemical reaction. What if I told you that it's only after baking soda and vinegar come together that we truly understand more about each of them and their ingredient? When we saw that awesome reaction, it wasn't because baking soda and vinegar were working against each other. It was actually because they were working together to create something brand new. And I think the same is true when it comes to science and faith. When we take a closer look at science and faith, we get a better understanding of how they work together. And honestly, I think that's the way God meant for it to be. How do I know? Well, I think the Bible, which is an incredible record of the relationship between God and humans, it gives us some direction when it comes to faith and science. The very first book of the Bible, it's called Genesis. It's sort of like the opening scene of the movie that lays the foundation for the rest of the story. And the very first words in Genesis, aka the first words in the Bible, say this: "In the beginning, God." So why exactly is that important? Well, because the very first thing the Bible tells us is that God was there. Before anything else existed, there was God. That's the first thing we know to be true about the universe. God was there before it all began. And from there, look at what God did.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was empty, formless, and dark. But the Spirit of God was there. On the first day, God said, "Let there be light." And God saw that the light was good. Then He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. On the second day, God said, "Let there be a space to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." God called the space sky. On the third day, God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so dry ground may appear." God called the dry ground land and the waters seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land sprout with every sort of plant and tree." And God saw that it was good. On the fourth day, God said, "Let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night." God made two great lights, the sun for the day and the moon for the night. He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, and God saw that it was good. On the fifth day, God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." And God saw that it was good. On the sixth day, God said, "Let the earth make every sort of animal." God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to have babies of the same kind. And God saw that it was good.
Okay, isn't that pretty amazing? Every single thing we see and experience in creation today was made by God a really, really long time ago. It's all here because of the God who made it. Of course, this includes you and me and every human being on Earth, but we'll get more into that next week. See, while the writer of Genesis may not have given us all the details of how the world works, the writer reminded us that God is the one who created it. I mean, God could have given us every detail on how exactly every part of the world was made, but maybe that's not included in the Bible because God wants us to be curious about it. Maybe God wants us to be learning about creation and the way the world works, and for that to be part of the way we grow in our faith. They say you can learn a lot about an artist by looking at their art. If you have a favorite singer, you could probably learn a lot about who they are by looking at their song lyrics. If you see a really cool painting, there's probably something in that can tell you a bit about what the artist was thinking or feeling while they painted it. Or if you read a really great book, there's probably something in it that can help you learn about the way the author sees the world. Well, according to the writer of Genesis, the entire universe and everything in it is God's creation. We are God's artwork. The plants are God's creation. The things we see around us in the world are part of God's art. And the more we learn about those things, the more we can learn about God. In other words, creation points to a creator. When we dive into science and start learning about the world around us, we don't have to be afraid of what it means for our faith. Instead, we can be excited to know that the more we learn about the world God created, the more we actually learn about God. So what do we do with all of this? If what we said is true, that creation points to the creator, what now? If taking a closer look at one can help us learn more about the other, how do we start approaching science and faith in a new way? I think we need to start by doing these 3 things. Number 1, be comfortable asking tough questions. Remember, God made every single detail of the world, including you and me. God made us with brilliant minds capable of asking all kinds of questions and discovering all kinds of new things. So if you have a question about science, awesome. Maybe exploring those will help you see new things about God who made it. Got a question about faith? That's awesome too. Maybe by learning about the way the world was made, you'll discover more about God and who made it. Being curious about how science and faith work together is a great starting point for discovering more about both. Okay, number 2, learn about both God and science. For example, did you know that the Earth is placed exactly the perfect distance from the sun? If we were any closer or further from it, we wouldn't survive. I think that shows us that God wants to take care of us. Or did you know that when a baby is born, they can only see a short distance in front of them? It's the perfect distance for the baby to see their parents' faces when being held. I think that shows us something about the way God created family. Or did you know that the nerves of the body stretch hundreds and hundreds of miles? I think that shows us something about the way God cares about the details of who we are. The more we learn about both God and science, the stronger our faith can become. And then number 3, talk to older, wiser adults. When we have questions about faith or science, a great person to turn to is a trusted adult, like your small group leader or your parent or guardian. They can help you wrestle through some of your questions and understand more about creation and its creator. We shouldn't be afraid to ask questions or dive into knowing more about science or faith. In fact, one question I'd love for you to ask this week is this: where did you see God today? Look for signs of God in the world around you. Look for glimpses of the Creator in the creation that surrounds you. Let that be a great starting place to discover more about God, who made you, who loves you, and who wants you to grow in faith.